Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 220. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about the remote and enigmatic Easter Island, or Rapa Nui. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into this week's interview, I do have two news stories for you. You've probably already heard the first story. Southwest is at it again, I'm afraid. I like the airline, but they seem to keep getting in trouble booting people off planes. First, it was the gal with the mini skirt that was too short, and then it was the person who had the t-shirt that had the wrong logo. And this time they booted off celebrity Kevin Smith of Clerks and Silent Bob fame. And they booted him off because he was too large, they said. He normally bought 2 seats, but he was trying to book an earlier flight, and therefore he was traveling with just 1 seat. He said he was able to lower both the armrests and was able to fasten the seatbelt, so he did not feel that he should have violated their policy, but they did kick him off. They have since issued an apology, but Southwest, you may want to look at your training policies and see if there isn't something you can do to not keep having this happen. And then a much more controversial story is when the TSA forced a traveling policeman to remove his disabled son's leg braces and then walk through the metal detector. That has certainly gotten them a lot of flack. You can find links to both of those stories in the show notes, and then you can hear much more discussion about them on this week's This Week in Travel. So check out the show notes to that show as well. I'd like to welcome to the show Mike and Hillary from the SpotHopping blog. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, great to be on it.
And we are going to talk about Easter Island. Why did you go to Easter Island, first of all?
I was interested in Easter Island. It's one of those places that kind of defines remoteness and also mystery. There's the mystery of course, the giant sculptures there. Nobody knows how they were made or why they were made, and it's also one of the most remote places in the whole world. So to me, it was interesting in that respect. I think Mike might say something a little different.
Part of it was that we were in the middle of a round-the-world trip, and so we knew this was pretty much a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity where we were quitting our jobs. We bought round-the-world tickets, which allow you to travel pretty much. You can stop at as many places as you want, and there's no extra charge for making those stops. So as long as we were going to be crossing the Pacific Ocean, it would have been the same price whether we flew from the United States or South America to, let's say, New Zealand direct, or if we stopped at 2 or 3 places along the way. And so being that it's usually, as Hillary said, very difficult and expensive to get there, we had an opportunity to go there for no extra charge, and so it was kind of a no-brainer.
Okay. And what stands out from your visit there?
Well, what kind of hit me really was how it still hasn't realized that it's a tourist destination yet. Some friends of my parents have been going to Hawaii for the last probably like 40 or 50 years, and they talk about how when they used to go there originally, I mean, it was just so completely unspoiled, and all these places that nowadays are resort hotels on the beach back then were just nature. And to a large degree, Easter Island is like what I imagine that their Hawaii of the 60s used to be.
Yeah, my father was actually stationed in Hawaii in 1945, so I've seen the pictures of Hawaii with, I think the tallest building was the one hotel downtown that was, I want to say 2 or 3 stories tall.
It really had a small town feel.
Mm-hmm.
They gave us a map of the national parks. Most of the island is part of a Chilean national park, and on the map were photographs of every park ranger on the island.
Okay. And when you say small town, it's not a very populous island, as I recall.
No, not really. There's really only one town on it, and the rest of it's very sparsely populated, and the town itself isn't very large. It's about half native Easter Islanders, they call themselves Rapa Nui, and about half ethnic Chilean.
Okay.
Yeah, the population's under 5,000, actually.
And what surprised you about Easter Island?
One of the things that was really surprising about it was how open it was. There weren't really fences almost anywhere. First of all the livestock was pretty much just roaming around the island. They branded their horses and cows so they knew who they belonged to, but nothing was really fenced in. And that extended to the archaeological sites. None of the Moai were behind fences or walls. You could walk right up to them. They ask you not to because it's considered disrespectful in their culture to stand on the mounds where the statues are placed, but you really can just walk right up to them. And it really gave you a feeling of almost like you're the explorer finding it on your ship as one of the guys a couple hundred years ago.
And when you talk about the Moai and the statues, I'm hoping that most people who listen to this show have already caught up with us, but in case they haven't, tell us a little more about that very unique feature of Easter Island.
When the European explorers first discovered Easter Island, they found these giant stone statues that had been carved by the natives, and they're mostly on the seashore, so they were visible from the sea, and they're just massive. They're 2 to 3 times the height of a person, and it's just something that you wouldn't think could be done with Stone Age style technology. And they're very distinctive looking and really striking. They have eyes that look at you, and it's always been a mystery, A, why were they built, and B, how were they built? And one of the things that we were able to see on Easter Island were the quarries where the stone statues were carved out of the stone and from there moved to the seaside.
And even the idea of working with stone, among most Polynesian islands, the technology to do that was not available at the time that these statues were made. So in part it's a mystery as who it was that taught, whether they figured it out themselves or maybe there was some visitor from South America that came out there. Because the Rapa Nui arrived from the west, it's generally believed, and none of the peoples to the west do anything like this. And as Hillary pointed out, there were the quarries that they used. Because it's such a small place, within a couple of days you can see every single one of the places. And so they have the quarry where they carved the gray stone for the main part of the heads, the Moai. And then there's another quarry where they got this red, almost blood red, porous stone that they used for, it looks like a hat, but apparently they intended it to be the hair of the statues. Nowadays, most of them have long since fallen off. And so the common modern representation of the Moai doesn't actually have the red hair or hat on top of it. But I got to see the actual quarries where different steps of the process were being done. I mean, if they were to dig up one of these to extract some rock and start to form it, and it turned out that there was either a defect in it or a mistake was made during construction, they would just leave it there on the hillside. So it's almost like seeing a moment frozen in time where you can see different steps of the process just strewn about as if they had to get up and leave in a hurry.
And there's a lot of speculation. Were they meant to represent gods? Were they meant to represent their ancestors? Why were they facing the sea rather than facing inland towards the villages? You walk around and you stand among them, and there's endless speculation.
Any recommendations for when you go to the island? Do you just go to the one town and then travel around from there? Is it small enough that you can day trip everything?
Absolutely.
Okay. Any recommendations on where you would stay?
We stayed at a guest house called Tora'a, and we highly recommend it. We found it, we didn't have a guidebook. We found it, I believe, on TripAdvisor, and it was the most highly rated place on Easter Island, and we absolutely had a wonderful time. The owners, Bill and Edith, picked us up at the airport, brought us back, made us breakfast every morning. They were very chatty, very fun to hang around with, and we really enjoyed our room and we enjoyed staying there with them.
And I mean, even just arriving on the island, we got off the plane at night. It was the only flight of the day, and it's a big commotion as people are trying to find out who's the representative from their guest house and everything. And they showed up. They tossed a lei around each of our necks. And when we arrived at the guest house, it was surprisingly comfortable. And it had bananas growing in the back and mangoes, and they had guava trees. And sometimes we would just be hanging out in front of our room, and a horse would walk by from somewhere else on the island and just would start grazing out on the lawn, and nobody really batted an eyelash. It felt like almost like, you know, being taken back in time a little bit.
It was absolutely tropical paradise with livestock.
Okay. I don't know if I've heard that description before. What was the best day you had on Rapa Nui? Should I call it Rapa Nui or should I call it Easter Island, actually?
You know, it's Rapa Nui to the locals, it's Easter Island to us, to the Chileans, it's Isla de Pascua.
Same thing, okay.
Yeah. We were only there a couple of days. Most people only stay a couple of days. You can see the whole thing in 2 days. Like I said, it's really not that large. Both days we went out on a tour. Tora'a, Bill and Edith's guest house, they also have a tour company, and there was a local Rapa Nui guide who took us and the other guests around. And one day we saw half of the archaeological and ecological sites, and then the second day we saw the rest of them.
So you don't really have to pick and choose which sites you see when you're on
Correct.
Rapa Nui. Okay.
And to be honest, it's almost a moot point as to how many days it takes to see the island, because at least as of the time that we went, which was in 2008, there were only 2 flights a week. And so you could either stay from Wednesday to Saturday or from Saturday to Wednesday. And so even if you wanted to have a whirlwind stay and get everything done in 1 day or 2 days, you wouldn't be able to proceed further west. You would have to just maybe come in from Santiago and just head back the way you came.
Okay.
This was in early 2008. These days, I believe there is daily service to and from Santiago, but still, I think it's only twice a week you can go on to Tahiti.
Okay. And the whole thing with around the world tickets is you have to keep traveling in one direction, so you generally couldn't go back to Santiago. Okay.
Exactly.
And one warning you would give?
Warning? Sunscreen? I mean, I can't think of any specific... Oh, you know what? One more of annoyance, I guess, than warning was because Easter Island is a Chilean territory, you have to go through Chilean immigration at the airport, and if you're an American citizen, they have what they call a cobro por reciprocidad, a reciprocity charge, which is, the idea is that, I guess, because we Americans make it difficult for Chileans to come here, they, in return, make it especially difficult for us to visit them. In particular, not really difficult, actually, let me restate that. So because it can be expensive for a Chilean to come visit America, they have a charge that they apply only to Americans who are visiting Chile. And so when we arrived, we had to pay for a special pass that goes into our passport Fortunately, once it goes in, you can continue using it as long as you have that same passport. So if you intend to make 2 trips to Easter Island, you get 2 for the price of 1. But there was a bit of a surprise. We hadn't realized that until we arrived. But
I think it was
certainly worth it.
$120-something dollars.
Right, and you'll run into that with other countries. I know Brazil has the same thing.
Interesting.
China.
And it's response to our policies, so
Right.
we can't really complain too loud, I think, at that point.
Nope.
Right. I would say it was worth every penny, though.
Okay.
I looked up all the visa requirements on the State Department webpage before we left on our trip, and I didn't remember that. So
Okay.
don't get taken by surprise. Definitely bring your credit card with you to Chilean immigration.
Okay. Now, you talked about it being remote. The nearest land, I think you said within a 2,000-mile circle, the only other land is going to be Pitcairn Island, which only has 50 other people. So when was the moment that you felt that you were the most isolated, the most remote, and when did it feel just very familiar?
Looking at the stars, it felt really remote.
Okay.
You're in the southern hemisphere, so to us, it was different constellations, different sky, and just so clear, the stars. You don't normally see that. Most of the places that we go in North America are much more populated and have a lot of light pollution. So
Sure.
that's something I definitely distinctly remember from 2 years ago, being on Easter Island and staring at the sky at night.
It really hit me before it even landed. I mean, on the airplane, they had one of those GPS map screens, and you could see it was just the plane and just blue ocean all around. It was kind of, I couldn't even tell if it was moving. And then once we started to land, we could see the island on the horizon, and once we were right on top of it, they had to circle the entire island to get in position for the runway. And when we landed, we realized this wasn't an airport with multiple runways or anything like that. In fact, it didn't even have an area for the plane to make a loop. We landed on the runway, it taxied to the end, did a 180, which I've never seen a commercial jet do before. I just turned on almost on a dime, and then proceeded back down the runway in the other direction to let us off. And it felt like the landing of a single flight is almost like an event on the island, just because it happens so infrequently. We were on one of the tours, our second or third day, when the plane was landing. And again, I mean, you look up and it fills the whole sky, because you're used to everything being on a different scale. And then all of a sudden there's this plane just landing what seems to be right near you.
And did they announce as you were going out there that in case of a water landing, you were pretty much screwed? Is that the...
I guess, yeah. I mean, the only airline that goes there is Chile, and if there were some kind of a water landing, it's not like there'd be some other scheduled plane that they could have just gotten us out there on. They would certainly have to send something special, or perhaps we would just have to make do until the next flight comes in.
Okay. As you look at the pictures that you took on the trip, which one just brings it right back for you? Which one really captured Rapa Nui or Easter Island for you?
You know, we haven't talked about the caves yet.
I don't know about the caves,
true.
Okay.
There's a series of lava tube caves on the island that our guide knew pretty well, and he took us down to explore them. And again, it's the kind of thing, we looked at some caves in America and in Europe and stuff, and you'd put on fancy equipment and there would be ropes or something like that, but this was just climb down this kind of slopey thing, be careful not to fall, and underneath there, some of them had cave paintings from the original inhabitants, some of them they were growing fruits and things down there, and one of them was a tube that was very, very dark, but it led out to an outcropping over the ocean. And it was just an unusual thing to kind of crawl down into the ground and walk through a dark tunnel and come out to see waves crashing on the shore. And it was not something that I had experienced before, and it was just a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Very cool.
We actually have a video on our site that certainly I think is what brings me back more than any of the pictures, just because our camera, it had adjusted itself to the darkness of the cave, and then just all of a sudden there's this blinding circle as we step up to the hole in the face of the cliff. And at first the camera, it's just completely blinded by whiteness, and then once it fades, you realize that there's waves just crashing into the face of this cliff, and I've never seen anything like that before.
Very cool.
I think one aspect that is somewhat interesting. I guess it's your call. The island is already kind of going through a little bit of growing pains in that a few months after we had visited, there was a tourist who actually tried to break off a piece of one of the Moai and take it home as a souvenir. And every time something like that happens, they're going to be one step closer to putting up fences everywhere and being much more restrictive, and that would destroy, I think, a lot of the magic that made it so different for us.
Shortly after we were there in early 2008, they opened a luxury hotel, like a $500 a night resort. There had been nothing like that on the island.
Interesting. Best resources for planning a trip to Easter Island?
Oh, boy.
You said you didn't have a guidebook.
No, we didn't. Wiki Travel honestly has a pretty good article about Easter Island.
Okay.
Like you said, it's a small destination, so you don't really need an entire, unless you're really interested in the history or the archaeology of it. I didn't feel we needed an entire book. We were really fortunate that our guide was extremely knowledgeable.
Well, I'm always interested in history and archaeology, but we'll also link people over to your article, which I enjoyed reading, just the whole history of why it was called Easter Island, that it was discovered on Easter, the whole thing with the deforestation that led to the wars, that led to all of that. I find very interesting. So,
thank you.
We'll give people a link to that as well if they're interested in the history. Okay, so as we go to wind this down, what's one thing you should pack before you go to Easter Island?
Sunblock.
Sunblock, okay.
And a hat.
All right, and this is because you're in the southern hemisphere. Are you near the hole in the ozone layer?
It's quite tropical. The sun is just a little hotter and higher, I think, than I was used to. I did get burned my first day.
I would have thought you'd been a little further off from where... Okay.
Yeah, the sun is, at least the time of year that we went, which I believe was February, the sun was directly overhead, and so just having a hat on makes all the difference in the world as far as how hot you are as you're walking around. And pretty much all of the sights to see are going to be outdoors unless you're in one of the caves.
Okay. And then finish this sentence. You really know you're in Easter Island when what?
When you walk out of your hotel room in the morning and there's a pregnant horse eating grass directly in front of you.
Okay.
Next to the tropical hibiscus plants.
Next to the tropical hibiscus plants, okay.
Yes.
And then if you had to summarize, I'll say Rapa Nui, in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Remote, mysterious, and beautiful.
Excellent.
I can't improve on that.
Mike and Hillary, thanks so much for coming on the show and talking to us about Easter Island.
Thank you
so much.
I have one internet resource for you today, and that is a site that makes travel a little more predictable, and it's a site called flightcaster.com. And this is a site that you can use to predict whether a flight is likely to be delayed or not, and how likely it is to be delayed. So it's something you might want to use, for instance, if you're trying to book a tight connection. Is that first flight usually late, in which case you're going to leave more space? So flightcaster.com. The first thing I have to tell you in news of the community is we are doing a photo tour. I was going to say a photo cruise, and that's sort of true and sort of not. What we're going to do, and this is with Ralph Velasco and I, who was on the show just recently talking about travel photography, we're doing a joint travel tour to Egypt. And we're going to be starting that tour November 5th in Cairo. It's 9 days Cairo to Cairo, and then an optional cruise after that of the Upper Nile to see the Luxor area. And the reason we did it that way is that allows us to have 2 different prices, one that's less expensive for those who are on a tighter budget. And the budget for doing just the land portion is going to be about $1,315. And that's not counting airfare, of course, but that includes travel photography instruction. So I think that's a pretty good deal if you look at the rates of other things out there. So you might start thinking about that and start planning for it. You'll be booking that through me if you're interested. So just drop me an email at host@amateurtraveler.com if you need more details. I'll be getting out more information about that in terms of where it's going, but it's Cairo and Alexandria and some of the areas along Upper Egypt. And then again, with the extension available of also doing that Nile cruise, which is going to add on another about $800, something like that. And I'll get details out to you as soon as I know them. But mark November 5th on your calendar, and I certainly hope you could join me. It would be a lot of fun. You may remember that it was suggested we do a photo contest. I love the idea. We're going to do it. I'm still looking for a theme. We're going to put that together this week, and I'll announce it next week. Ralph Velasco has offered to give his book as a prize for that. We'll probably do that about a month-long contest. I think I'm planning on doing the first one here on Facebook on the Amateur Traveler Facebook fan page. So that's facebook.com/Amateur Traveler. So this week, if you're not on Facebook, get on Facebook and join that group and then contribute your ideas in terms of what the theme should be for the first contest. I was thinking we might do something that we talked about in the travel photography episode recently. So we might do the human element, or we might do reflections or something like that. So give me your thoughts, facebook.com/Amateur Traveler. And the contests just keep coming. I'm also doing a contest with the newsletter that if you join the newsletter at the end of a month from today, so on March 18th, I'm going to draw a name at random from the Amateur Traveler newsletter and give away a Fodor's book on Israel. And you can check out the blog at amateurtraveler.com for a review of that new series of guidebooks from Fodor's. I like it better than the old series. So make sure you're on the mailing list if you want to win that book. And I'm probably going to do more of that on a monthly basis. I had feedback that it was hard to find the button which is in the upper right-hand corner and says subscribe for free. That is a little envelope there in terms of signing up for the newsletter. So if you want, just go to amateurtraveler.com/newsletter and you can sign up. I got a comment on the website from CJ this week who was talking about the Iceland episode 204, and said, thanks so much for this interview. I'm heading to Iceland next week to get a look at the aurora and do my first bit of international travel. Extreme amateur here. Reykjavik and Akureyri are on my week-long itinerary. It will be interesting to see the difference between summer and winter Icelandic trips. Most everything I've been researching has a lot more information about the summers. Plus, I'm an Arizona boy with only a few relatively mild snow years, and I'm heading pretty much close to the Arctic Circle. I'm already regretting that I didn't give myself more time there, newbie. And I'm also sure I'll learn quite a few more lessons along the way. I should point out that was CJ saying newbie. That wasn't me. CJ, have a great time, and you may have noticed we talked about it on last week's show also as a destination that Pauline Fromer was recommending because it has gotten cheaper since the Icelandic economy has hit the skids. With that, I'm going to bring this show to a close. Remember, if you or your company is interested in advertising in the Amateur Traveler, it certainly would help keep this show afloat. If you have any questions, feel free to post them on the website, amateurtraveler.com, or send me an email to host@amateurtraveler.com. Join the Facebook group, get ready for the photo contest, mark your calendar for Egypt, November 5th, and follow me on Twitter at Chris2X. As always, thanks so much for listening.